And so, totalitarian state is a state that's in the grip of the lie. And so, what that means for each of us is that every time you lie, this is the truth of the matter. Every time you lie, you've just allowed yourself to become possessed by the same tyrannical spirit that's at the core of the totalitarian state. And you might think, no, I'm lying. It's like, no, the spirit of the lie is making itself manifest within you, and you are participating in your own possession. That's what's happening. And so I'm way more afraid of that than I am of the consequences of saying what I have to say. Okay, so now we might be practical about it. Let's say, well, now you're a high school teacher and you're in this situation where the woke mob is everywhere, and if you now dare to utter something that's necessarily true, right, because you're so desperate that you can't even retreat now because push has come to shove, and you say the wrong thing and you're going to get taken out. It's like, yeah, you are. And you might say, well, can you withstand that? And I would say, I wouldn't recommend it exactly. I probably know 200 people who've been canceled now. I had a good friend, colleague, very admirable man, who very emotionally stable, very wise person, well situated in his life, and he got canceled pretty decently, and it broke him enough so he was in a psychiatric ward for like 3 weeks. And so that's pretty much what's coming your way if you get canceled. I don't think I've ever seen anyone who was canceled who didn't respond to it about the same way that people respond to a near fatal illness. Now, there are some exceptions, very few. Douglas Murray is an exception. You know about Douglas Murray, perhaps. He's got the spine for a fight. And so when the mob comes for him, his attitude generally is, just bring it on, you pricks. And Murray's got away with that pretty well, you know, but he's a singular person. There aren't very many people like that. And you know, so good for him. Back to this problem. So now you're in a situation where if you have been driven by desperation to finally understand that you have to say what you have to say or pay the spiritual consequences, let's say, but now it's gone too far because there's been 3,000 micro-retreats, you're going to face something like cancellation, which is justice at the hands of a vengeful mob, let's say. It's going to be pretty damn brutal. And it isn't necessarily even obvious that you'll survive. So that's a pretty rough choice. Now, I dealt with people who were in that sort of situation in my clinical practice because they were people who'd been cornered by ideologically possessed bullies at work and tortured beyond their ability to tolerate it and needed to figure out how to free themselves. And that usually took like a year of strategizing. And so the first thing you got to ask yourself is, well, is your CV or your resume in order? If you get fired, could you find another job? If you get fired so hard that you can't find a new job in your profession, which is what happens if you're really effectively canceled, do you have the wherewithal and the resources to find gainful employment somewhere else? Because you might be in a situation where you think, well, I can't say what I have to say because I have a family that's dependent on me. And that's a real concern. You can't just say, well, shoot off your mouth anyways. It's like, well, you've got people depending on you. If you now casually utter a truth and you're fired, well, maybe you've been successful in some trivial regard in relationship to standing up to the woke mob, but what about your wife or your husband and your kids? You can't just put all that aside, so you got to start thinking strategically here. You're in a war. A war is a sequence of battles. You better get your arms in order. And so the first thing I would do with my clients was, well, let's get your CV in order, get your resume in order, and start setting up the situation so you have alternatives. You know, when I got mobbed first, when I objected to Canada's compelled speech legislation, my job as a university professor was seriously threatened. I got 2 letters from the human resources people, and I know how human resources people work. They send you a letter and tell you to stop, and that's letter number 1, and then they send you another letter and tell you to stop, and that's letter number 2, and then they send you letter number 3. Then they've documented your misbehavior sufficiently and given you fair warning, and then they fire you. It's just a procedure. I'd seen this happen many times. I knew exactly what was going on, and they got to 2 letters with me. And at the same time, for similar reasons, not precisely the same, but similar, my clinical practice was threatened. So I had 3 jobs. I was a university professor, I had a clinical practice, and I had a personal business. And so I wasn't that easy to take out, because you had to take me out 3 ways to be successful, because I could have used any of those to keep myself going. But 2 of them got blown out of the water. Now the third actually boomed as a consequence, so that was kind of nice.